stop digging, or we'll finish what Sage started. But I didn't stop. And now they're gone. And I built a house where people become family not by blood, but by choice. When I heard the words that were supposed to be a blow, I knew this wasn't just another argument. This was the end. Thanksgiving, my favorite tradition. The house I had built for my family. The meal I thought we'd all gather for. That's how I pictured it. But when my son, Elmer, told me I wouldn't be welcome at the celebration, my knees buckled. I struggled to steady myself against the kitchen counter, my mind going blank. I couldn't believe he had said it seriously. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Dad, we're having a small gathering with friends, you know, he started. But I couldn't listen anymore. What do you mean? Why am I not invited? I asked, though the answer echoed clearly in my mind. I was no longer considered part of this family. Well, you see, his voice became weak, as if he himself no longer believed in his excuses. It's just, you know, our friends. They might not. It'll be uncomfortable for you. Uncomfortable. I cut him off, my words barely escaping my throat. You're telling me I'm not welcome because it'll be uncomfortable for you? I'm your father, Elmer. I'm the one who helped you get on your feet, the one who put everything into this house. But he fell silent. The silence filled the space as I realized the terrible truth. These people, the ones I had fed, who had used every moment of my patience and support, no longer saw me as part of their family. My blood was boiling. And who told you that I would be uncomfortable, Elmer? I asked, my voice cold, something I couldn't control anymore. His eyes didn't meet mine. He just muttered, I'm sorry, Dad. It's not going to work out. Sorry, I shouted, my words ringing in the air. You mean to tell me that I can't be with you on Thanksgiving because it's not going to work out? I am your father, Elmer. This house, this life, I built it for you. He didn't respond. He just stood there, looking at the floor. And in that moment I knew. All those years, every gesture, every dollar I had spent on them, none of it was worth a thing. They didn't care. They never had. I clenched my fists and turned to leave. The air felt colder than I had ever known it. You tell Mabel I've changed my mind, I said, my voice low and measured. Tell her I'll go somewhere else. Goodbye, Elmer. I closed the door behind me and stood there on the threshold. I was ready for revenge. And if they thought I would back down, they were wrong. I already knew that my next move would be decisive, but they had no idea what I was preparing for them. When I left Elmer's house, the world seemed to freeze. The only two feelings running through my mind were the bitterness of betrayal and the cold, steely resolve to do something about it. I drove through the streets, but all I could think about was what had just happened, about how much I had poured into these people. How many years had I supported them, taken care of them, and in return, I got nothing but manipulation and disdain. In their eyes, I was nothing but a walking ATM. How long could I keep putting up with this? My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, and my heart pounded so hard that it felt like it might leap out of my chest. But now it didn't matter. I knew that I would no longer be the man who forgives, the man who always finds excuses for others. They stopped valuing me. So now it was time to do things my way. I pulled over to the side of the road and took my phone out of my pocket. It had all the information I needed to make my move. Social media, bank statements, photos they had posted, their habits. I knew everything about them. Over the years, while I worked tirelessly, they had been showing off their wealth without hesitation. They flaunted their expensive things, their shopping sprees, their lives that were paid for by my hard-earned money. I opened Elmer's Facebook profile. All those photos of him and Freya dining at expensive restaurants, throwing lavish parties in their new house. The house I had helped pay for with my money. His wife, Freya, always dressed in expensive outfits, always posing with a new purse, one that I had paid for. Her mother, Nora, had always been watching, always backing up their extravagant lifestyle, as if this was their right. But it wasn't just them I was after. I knew Elmer wasn't the only one using me. Freya, his wife, was hiding just as much. I found some old messages where she discussed purchases she couldn't afford. But of course, She had no problem asking me for help. And I noticed a familiar name, Winston, Elmer's friend who worked at a major investment firm. I already knew he was part of this circle, taking advantage of my money to rise in their cold, ruthless world. I leaned back in my chair, deep in thought. I had everything I needed. All their secrets, all their weaknesses. It was time to act. I had one chance to destroy their world and put everything back in its place. If I didn't do it now, I would always be the old man they ignored and betrayed. Before starting, I decided I needed to be strategic. I organized all the information into folders, bank transfers, receipts, photos. Every document would become a piece of my plan. I remembered how they prided themselves on their image, how they used my money to enjoy prestige and status. But now, it was time for their downfall. I knew they didn't think about me when they were building their dreams on my money, but I would make them think about me, and I think they would be thinking about it for a long time. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and began drafting my plan. My list of steps was ready. Today was the first day I would begin to act. I knew I could do it all. I would become the person they could no longer ignore. I was ready to take on the role of the enemy, who would destroy their world and make them pay for what they had done to me. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Freya. I knew she must have sensed something was off. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound when I opened it. "Dennis, I hope you're not making decisions based on emotions. We all know how you feel, but you understand we're doing all of this for family. Please, don't cut ties with us. We still love you." I laughed bitterly, barely holding back a furious shout. They were still trying to manipulate me. They still couldn't see that I wasn't the same man I used to be. I would no longer let them control me with their false affection. I was going to tear apart their world, and they would understand that for everything they had done, they would have to pay. Taking a deep breath, I put my phone down. The time had come. Now, they would know what it meant to play with someone who wasn't afraid anymore. But as I prepared to make my first move, one strange thought flickered in my mind. What if they were already ready for me to start acting? And if that was the case, I needed to be prepared for a game that might be much more complicated than I originally thought. The next day, I woke up with one clear thought. It was my turn now. I spent the entire night crafting my strategy. Every move had to be precise, like a seasoned chess player. Every detail, every step in this game would matter. And I knew, if I did it right, their world would come crashing down. But if I made a mistake, I would just be the old man who continued to live in the shadow of those who no longer valued him. I got out of bed and walked over to the table where all my documents were laid out. All their lies, all their games with my money were now in my hands. They thought they could manipulate me, that I would tolerate their insults. But now I was going to destroy their world, just as they had destroyed mine. I opened the bank statements folder, where each page proudly displayed the amounts I had sent them. Their mortgage payments, home repairs, travel money. Each one was part of my life, part of my sacrifice. Now they would feel the consequences of their disregard for me. I decided to start with a letter. This would be my first warning. No threats, no loud words. I knew how much they valued their reputation. I would use that. I opened my laptop and wrote, "Dear Elmer and Freya, I wanted to remind you how much I've contributed to your home and your life. You may remember how I helped, but I believe the time has come for you to realize I am no longer the person who forgives everything. Soon, you will receive all the necessary documents proving my support for your family. You should think carefully before continuing your manipulations. If you want to resolve this amicably, we can talk. Regards, Dennis." When I finished the letter, I reread it. Not a word out of place. Everything was perfect, just as I had planned. I hit send. Holding my breath, I stared at the screen, waiting for their reaction. I knew it wouldn't take long. Soon, the response appeared. It was a message from Freya. "Dennis, you shouldn't have done this. We're doing everything for the family. Please don't complicate things. You know we value your help, but this is not that simple. We love you, but you need to understand that everything we do is for you." I laughed bitterly, barely holding back a furious shout. This was an attempt to manipulate me. I knew she would try to use guilt and pity, but I didn't care anymore. I needed more than just apologies. I needed to tear down their facade, destroy their perfect world. I replied quickly, with no emotion. I understand. But you don't understand the most important thing. I'm no longer your tool, and soon you'll feel it. After sending the message, I leaned back in my chair and thought about the next move. Now I needed to attack from a different angle. I knew I had to find more compromising facts, more information that would expose their actions as ruthless. For that, I needed to keep digging into Elmer's connections, his friends, their business dealings. That's when I decided to act. Winston. I already knew he was part of this game, and I knew he could give me the information I needed. The time was right. I knew Winston had a weakness, his love for gambling. I remembered how he once told me he lost a large sum at a casino. That could be the key. If I could work this into the story, his reputation would be shattered. I reached out to an old acquaintance who worked at one of the casinos where Winston frequented. He told me Winston had been in debt, and those debts could lead to serious problems. Problems that I could use. Armed with all the information I needed, I prepared for the next step. This was going to be the final nail in their perfect world. But something made me uneasy. Why were they so calm? Why wasn't Freya trying to manipulate me like she used to? Suddenly, I had the feeling someone was watching me. Someone from their circle. I couldn't figure out what was happening, but one thing was clear. I needed to be careful. Before I could make my next move, I received a message that changed everything. It wasn't from Freya, nor from Elmer. It was from Winston, and it was strange. The message from Winston made me flinch. I held my breath, trying to figure out what he could possibly be writing. He was part of their circle, part of this world I was planning to destroy. I opened the message with hesitation and read it. Dennis, I know what you're planning, and if you think this will be easy, you're mistaken. You have no idea who you're playing against. I've already heard about your moves, and you won't be able to hide. Before you go any further, think about who you're really putting at risk. Trust me, you'll regret it if you take this to the end. I stared at the screen, unable to believe it. How did he know? Who told him? It was almost too late to back out, but now I knew. I needed to be one step ahead. Winston was clever. He could use his connections to make me vulnerable. He was part of a circle I was going to tear down, and now he was trying to intimidate me. But I wasn't the kind of person who could be scared. My fingers tightened around my phone, and I felt the blood rush to my temples. He couldn't intimidate me. I was ready to destroy their world, and no threats would stop me. Thoughts were racing in my head about how to respond. I needed to use this threat, not fear it. I typed my reply. You really think you can scare me? I know all your secrets, Winston, and you know I won't stop. If you think I'm incapable of this, you're wrong. I will do whatever it takes to make this end on my terms, and it will be far worse for you if you try to stop me. After sending the message, I felt a brief sense of relief. I wasn't afraid of people like him. I had always lived with the belief that if you stand for the truth, you'll win. They were the villains of my story, and if I didn't give up, I would beat them. But still, anxiety lingered. Winston was a skilled manipulator, and if he knew what I was planning, that meant he was preparing his own move. I decided to meet with an old acquaintance, Daniel, who knew more than I did. He had worked in finance for years and understood how to protect one's interests. I dialed his number, and within minutes, we arranged to meet at a cafe. As soon as I arrived, he greeted me and, without wasting time, said, Dennis, you need to be careful. I've heard about your issues with Winston. This isn't just a threat. He won't sit idly by. I'm not afraid of him, I replied, though I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. But how do I avoid walking into a trap? How do I protect myself? Daniel, pausing for a moment, explained that Winston wasn't just a man with powerful connections. He was part of a network that didn't forgive mistakes. If Winston wanted to play his card, he could do it quickly and effectively. I needed to be prepared for anything. I felt something tighten inside me. I realized that everything I'd done up to this point might be for nothing if I wasn't careful. But there was no turning back. I had already come too far. At that moment, someone entered the cafe. A person I wasn't expecting to see. It was Elmer. I clenched my teeth, trying not to reveal my displeasure. He came to my table with a tense look on his face. "Dad," he said, sitting down across from me. "I know what you're planning, and I'm asking you to stop. You don't understand what you're getting into." I looked at him, trying to figure out what was behind those words. He had always been a mystery to me. Elmer was just like the others, willing to use me. But now that I was making a move, he wanted to intervene. Why had he suddenly decided to speak up? "You can't keep going with this," he continued, lowering his voice. "Winston knows more than you think. If you go any further, the consequences will be devastating. Not just for you, but for all of us." I sat there silent. Was he right? Or was he just trying to manipulate me, like before? Maybe he didn't know everything I knew, but his words made me stop and think. "You don't have to continue this," he pressed, his voice filled with desperation. "It's too dangerous. Please, I'm asking you to stop." I sat in silence, weighing his words. Part of me wanted to believe him, but another part of me knew I couldn't back down now. Just as I was about to respond to Elmer, my phone vibrated again. It was a message from Winston, and it had something in it that made my hair stand on end. When I opened Winston's message, I felt a chill run down my spine. His words were short but heavy. "You think you're in control of this, but you don't know who you're playing against. I'm warning you, Dennis. If you go any further, you're going to destroy more than just your life. I have ways to stop you. You're going to regret starting this game." I couldn't believe my eyes. How did he know? Who told him? It was almost too late to back out, but now I understood. I had to be one step ahead. Winston was clever. He could use his connections to make me vulnerable. He was part of a circle I was planning to destroy, and now he was trying to intimidate me. But I wasn't the kind of person who could be scared. My fingers tightened around my phone, and I could feel the blood rush to my temples. He couldn't intimidate me. I was ready to destroy their world, and no threats would stop me. Thoughts raced through my head on how to respond. I needed to use this threat, not fear it. I typed my reply calmly, without haste. "You really think you can scare me? I know all your secrets, Winston, and you know I won't stop. If you think I'm incapable of this, you're wrong. I will do whatever it takes to make this end on my terms, and it will be far worse for you if you try to stop me." After sending the message, I felt a brief sense of relief. I wasn't afraid of people like him. I had always lived with the belief that if you stand for the truth, you'll win. They were the villains of my story, and if I didn't give up, I would beat them. But still, anxiety lingered. Winston was a skilled manipulator, and if he knew what I was planning, that meant he was preparing his own move. I decided to meet with an old acquaintance, Daniel, who knew more than I did. He had worked in finance for years and understood how to protect one's interests. I dialed his number, and within minutes, we arranged to meet at a cafe. As soon as I arrived, he greeted me and, without wasting time, said, "Dennis, you need to be careful. I've heard about your issues with Winston. This isn't just a threat. He won't sit idly by." "I'm not afraid of him," I replied, though I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. But how do I avoid walking into a trap? How do I protect myself? Daniel, pausing for a moment, explained that Winston wasn't just a man with powerful connections. He was part of a network that didn't forgive mistakes. If Winston wanted to play his card, he could do it quickly and effectively. I needed to be prepared for anything. I felt something tighten inside me. I realized that everything I'd done up to this point might be for nothing if I wasn't careful. But there was no turning back. I had already come too far. At that moment, someone entered the cafe. A person I wasn't expecting to see. It was Elmer. I clenched my teeth, trying not to reveal my displeasure. He came to my table with a tense look on his face. "Dad," he said, sitting down across from me. "I know what you're planning, and I'm asking you to stop. You don't understand what you're getting into." I looked at him, try to figure out what was behind those words. He had always been a mystery to me. Elmer was just like the others, willing to use me. But now that I was making a move, he wanted to intervene. Why had he suddenly decided to speak up? You can't keep going with this, he continued, lowering his voice. Winston knows more than you think. If you go any further, the consequences will be devastating, not just for you, but for all of us. I sat there silent. Was he right? Or was he just trying to manipulate me, like before? Maybe he didn't know everything I knew, but his words made me stop and think. You don't have to continue this, he pressed, his voice filled with desperation. It's too dangerous. Please, I'm asking you to stop. I sat in silence, weighing his words. Part of me wanted to believe him, but another part of me knew I couldn't back down now. Just as I was about to respond to Elmer, my phone vibrated again. It was a message from Winston, and it had something in it that made my hair stand on end. I looked at my phone again. The message from Winston was short, but it left me uneasy. You don't realize who you're messing with, Dennis. If you go any further, you'll lose everything. This isn't just a game. You're playing with fire. I'm not your enemy. I'm warning you. Stop before it's too late. I clenched my phone, feeling the tension building inside me. These threats were starting to wear on me. He couldn't stop me. This was my move, and I wasn't going to back down. But something in his message made me pause. He knew me, knew I wouldn't stop. But what did he really mean by that? Something told me that Winston was playing a deeper game than I had initially realized. I'm not playing with fire. I'm playing with the truth, I thought, trying to steady my nerves. The time had come. I couldn't let anyone manipulate me any longer. But even when I knew I had all the cards in my hand, I felt like I was missing something important. Could I trust my own actions? Something inside me told me I was overlooking something. At that moment, I heard a noise in the room. Elmer was sitting across from me, watching me. There was something different in his eyes, something more than just concern. It was anxiety. He was clearly on edge now, and I felt like he had finally realized how serious I was. I wasn't backing down. You don't understand, Dad, he said, looking at me with a mixture of frustration and worry. If you go any further, we're all in danger. You don't know who you're really dealing with. I sat there silent, trying to figure out what he meant. Elmer had always been a mystery to me. He was just like the others, ready to use me. But now that I was making my move, he wanted to intervene. Why had he suddenly decided to speak up? You can't keep going with this, he continued, lowering his voice. Winston knows more than you think. If you go any further, the consequences will be devastating, not just for you, but for all of us. I stayed quiet. Was he right? Or was he just trying to manipulate me again, like before? Maybe he didn't know everything I knew, but his words were making me think. You don't have to continue this, he pressed, his voice full of desperation. It's too dangerous. Please, I'm asking you to stop. I sat there, considering his words. Part of me wanted to believe him, but another part of me knew I couldn't back down now. I'm not going to stop, I finally said, looking him in the eyes. You think I'm going to back off because you say so? I'm not scared anymore, Elmer, and I'm not turning back. Elmer went pale. He knew it was over. He couldn't stop me. The look on his face said it all. I stood up and walked to the closet, where I kept my personal things. I needed to clear my mind. Winston was raising the stakes. Elmer had just opened my eyes to another part of their manipulation. He was still part of their world, the world that had used me. He couldn't understand that I wasn't afraid to burn it all down. I opened the closet and started going through old papers. It was at this moment that I realized that everything I had done until now was just preparation. It wasn't until I opened an old box of papers that I saw something I almost forgot. There, buried under old letters, was a photo I hadn't seen in years. It was a picture of my wife, Marina. She was standing with Winston the day we first met him. I froze. Something wasn't adding up. Winston, his connection to Marina, this wasn't random. Thoughts began to form in my head that I hadn't been able to put together before. He had been closer to my family than I thought. All this time, he had been part of their world. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about them anymore. I wasn't just uncovering their secrets. I was uncovering my own. Winston knew far more than I had ever imagined. But just as I thought I had the answers, my phone vibrated again. The screen lit up with a number I never expected to see. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the number on the screen. It was familiar, but I wasn't expecting it. This number had been part of my past, the kind of past I had tried to leave behind, with people I thought could no longer influence my life. But now, that number was back on the screen, a reminder that I couldn't just escape from all of this. I froze, unsure of what to do. At first, I hesitated, wondering what this call could mean. I should have just ignored it, not answered, but something made me pick up in the end. "Dennis." I heard a familiar voice. It was Mabel. She had been on the periphery, in her own world, but she was also part of their game. In the past, she had been a friend, but now everything had changed. "Mabel," I replied, trying to hide the tension in my voice. "What do you want?" "I know what you're going through right now, and I know what you're planning to do," she said, with a hint of worry in her voice. "You need to be careful. Winston is not someone you can just easily fight." Her words sounded genuine, but I knew she didn't speak without reason. I felt the anxiety rise in my chest, but I couldn't let it take over. I needed more information, and I knew Mabel could help. "What do you mean, Mabel?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you know about Winston? Why are you suddenly getting involved?" She was silent on the other end. I could hear her thinking. She clearly wasn't sure if she wanted to say everything, but her voice held something that made me uneasy. "You don't understand, Dennis," she said, almost whispering. "He's not who he says he is. I tried to warn you before, but now it's too late." What did she mean by that? My thoughts started to spiral. Winston was the man I needed to confront, but Mabel was telling me that I was missing something important. She said I didn't understand who he really was. But what was hidden behind this man? "You're trying to warn me now?" I pressed. "What's really going on?" She fell silent again. I could hear her breathing heavily, as if she was weighing her words. Finally, she spoke, her voice shaking slightly. "You'll see for yourself," she said quietly. "But know this, he's been watching your every move. He knows you're coming for him, and he's already set a trap. You have no idea how far he's gone." Her words hung in the air, and I felt a coldness spread through me. Winston knew what I was planning. He was prepared. Mabel wasn't telling me everything, but I could sense that she was trying to warn me. She wasn't just calling out of concern. She was trying to tell me something important, but why now? Why speak up now when everything was so close to breaking? "What do you want from me, Mabel?" I asked, trying to steady my breath. "Why are you intervening now?" "You'll make the right choice, Dennis," she said, almost too quietly. "Just remember, not everything is as simple as it seems. Winston, he's been in the game for far longer than you think, and you might just be a pawn if you're not careful." I felt a tightness in my chest. Her words hung in the air like heavy, ominous bells tolling. I knew that things were about to get even more complicated, not just with Winston, but with everyone around me. They knew how to manipulate me, how to play me, and I was starting to realize that the stakes were much higher than I had imagined. "You don't have to keep going, Dennis," she said softly, and I heard something deeper in her voice, something more personal, something hidden that I wasn't ready to understand. "Please, stop before it's too late." She didn't say anything more. The call ended abruptly, and I was left in a deep, unsettled silence. I sat there, feeling the walls close in around me, as the shadows of my past began to creep back into my thoughts. Just as I was trying to make sense of what she meant, I heard footsteps. Someone had walked up behind me, and I felt the blood freeze in my veins. It was someone I had expected to see, but not in this place, and not at this moment. I froze, feeling the cold sweep over me as footsteps approached. Someone was standing behind me. I didn't turn immediately. My mind was blank, only filled with unease. Too many things were becoming clear, and at that moment, I lacked one thing: certainty. The shadow moving in the doorway made me feel a chill, despite the warmth inside the room. I knew this wasn't a random person. At some point, I realized I couldn't avoid this meeting. I just had to face him head on. "You didn't expect me here, did you?" The voice came from behind. It was familiar. It was Winston. His words were calm, but there was an underlying threat. I turned around and met his gaze. He stood in the doorway, a barely perceptible smile on his face. Winston was the kind of person I knew too well to not understand his games. He was layered, secretive, and always had a way of manipulating situations to his benefit. "You're not here to just chat, are you?" I asked, my voice firm, but laced with underlying tension I couldn't quite hide. Winston smiled, but his eyes stayed cold and calculating. "Your determination is impressive, Dennis. You really think you can destroy this world? You have no idea what kind of game this is. You've become a pawn on a board that's been prepared long ago." I wanted to respond, but something in his tone made me stop. He was too confident, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of something much more dangerous. I knew Winston had already made moves that no one could predict. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to regain control. His presence in the room unsettled me, and I knew this meeting could have consequences I wasn't fully prepared for. Winston walked closer and sat down at the table. He wasn't in a rush. His behavior had no sign of nervousness. On the contrary, he was calm, too calm. His calmness was a fire hidden beneath the surface, one that threatened to burn everything I had built. "I'm here to offer you a choice, Dennis," he said, placing his hands on the table. "You think you can destroy my world, but in reality, you've already been part of a game you don't control. All of your steps have already been calculated. You can't walk away from this." I wanted to get angry, but his words froze me. I understood, at that moment, that he wasn't just here for a casual conversation. He had prepared this. He wasn't just a threat. I was now part of something much bigger. His calm demeanor was more than a tactic. It was a warning. "What are you offering?" I asked, realizing this could be the pivotal moment. But whatever I did, I needed to be prepared for the truth. Winston looked at me, and I saw something strange in his eyes, a mixture of satisfaction and contempt. He knew I was close, but not quite there. He knew I was standing at the edge, unsure of the next step. "You can walk away from this, Dennis," he said. "We can forget about all of this. You live your life, and I'll live mine. But if you choose to keep going, know that it's not your game. You're just a tool." I felt the air tighten in my chest. He was speaking to me like I was already lost in his web. He knew my every move, and now I was wondering if this moment had been planned from the start. I had been drawn into this world, and I was now in too deep to pull out. "Why are you even talking to me?" I asked, trying to understand what he was really offering. He was someone who knew how to manipulate, and everything he said seemed like part of his strategy. He wanted to make me doubt myself. "Because you're already in the game, Dennis," he said with a faint smile. "You can't leave without making the final move. You and we're two players in this game, and you know neither of us can stop." I felt the weight of his words. I was on the edge of a cliff, but I couldn't see where it led. Winston was right. I couldn't walk away now. I had to see this through. But what was the next step? Just as I thought I had the answers, the door suddenly opened. Someone entered, and I heard a voice that struck like thunder in clear skies. When the door opened, I felt the air in the room change instantly. I turned around, not expecting to see this person. He had been part of my life, but like so many others, I had tried to leave him in the past. This moment wasn't just unexpected. It turned everything I knew upside down. "You didn't expect to see me, did you, Dennis?" His voice was low but confident. I recognized immediately. It was Michael, my son. He stood in the doorway with that expression I couldn't quite read. He was the same as always, composed, but there was something new in his eyes. It was more than just involvement. He was here with intention. I felt a mixture of emotions hit me all at once. Disappointment, anger, and perhaps fear. Michael had once meant more to me than anyone, but now he was part of this world I was planning to destroy. And now, here he was, the last person I thought I'd have to face. "Michael," I said, trying to hide the unease in my voice. "How did you get here? Why are you here?" He took a step toward the table, his eyes never leaving mine. "I came to talk, Dad. I know what you're trying to do. I know what you're thinking. But you can't just tear everything down. You don't understand what you're about to lose. His words were almost convincing. I could see in him the same internal struggle I had, but I couldn't understand why he suddenly decided to intervene. Why had he returned? Why now, when I was ready to make my move? Michael, I said, trying to control my anger. You don't get to tell me what I'm losing. You were part of all of this. You used me, and now, when I'm about to act, you want to stop me. Michael looked uncomfortable, but he didn't back down. You don't get it. You don't know who you're really dealing with. Winston, he's not just standing in your way. You don't realize what you're about to lose. This isn't just about money anymore. I felt my nerves crack. Was he right? I was standing at the edge, and all these words felt like an attempt to pull me back into their game, the very game I was supposed to destroy. But in his eyes, I saw something that made me doubt. He was my son, but was he also my enemy? You have no right to tell me what I'm losing, I responded, not holding back the fury. You were part of this whole thing, Michael. You used me, and now you're trying to stop me when I'm finally ready to make a change. Michael looked pained, but he kept his ground. You don't understand. You don't know who you're up against. Winston, he's not who you think he is. You're about to lose everything, and not just the money. I felt the weight of his words, but I couldn't stop now. I was standing on a precipice, and the words, no matter how convincing, couldn't make me turn back. But his presence made me question everything again. Why had he come back now? Was he trying to warn me? Or was he just trying to control me, like he always had? You don't get to tell me what I'm about to lose, I said, my voice steadier. I'm the one making the choices now, Michael. I'm the one who's been held back for too long. Just then, Michael stepped forward and pulled an envelope from his pocket. When he placed it on the table in front of me, I realized this wasn't just any letter. This was a document that could change everything. In that moment, as Michael placed the envelope on the table, I knew it wasn't just a letter. It was a game changer. What was inside? And would it be enough to stop me from going forward with my plan? I slowly reached for the envelope that Michael had left on the table. My mind was spinning. He had been so calm, so sure of himself when he handed me the document, that I felt the weight of its significance hanging in the air. Was this really the moment when I had to decide which path I would take? I tore open the envelope without hesitation, but there was something inside me that felt uneasy. I pulled out a piece of paper and saw a seal. This was a legal document. I glanced at Michael, but his face remained unreadable as always. He was waiting for my reaction, and his calmness only heightened my unease. I began to read. Dear Dennis, this letter serves as an official notice of the upcoming legal proceedings regarding your financial actions with Greenfield Holdings. This lawsuit, seeking to recover funds for breach of contract, will be heard shortly. I stopped, only halfway through the first lines. A lawsuit? This was more than serious. All these years I had done everything I could to support them. But now I realized that it wasn't just my money at stake. This document could jeopardize everything I had worked for in my life. All my efforts, every dollar I had poured into their well-being, now seemed to lead me toward financial and legal ruin. What is this? I asked, hardly believing my eyes. Michael didn't answer immediately, and that only made me more worried. I saw his fingers nervously grip the edge of the table. You understand that if this goes the way they want, you'll lose not just your money. You'll lose everything that's ever mattered to you. Freya and we didn't want you to get involved, but now it's already out in the open. What? They knew about this before? But why had they kept quiet? Why hadn't they warned me? You knew about this? I asked, my mind racing. You knew this could happen, and you didn't tell me? Michael slowly nodded, his gaze firm. Yes, I knew. But you have to understand, Dad, it wasn't that simple. This wasn't just your game. We're all in it. My hands clenched into fists. Now I couldn't stop. If they were all involved in this, if Winston and the others had really been manipulating me, I needed to make moves I hadn't considered before. At that moment, the phone rang. The name on the screen made my heart stop. I froze. This was the person who could put an end to this game once and for all. I couldn't move. My gaze was fixed on the phone, the name flashing on the screen. It was a number I knew all too well to ignore. This call was no accident. I knew that now I would have to make the final move, and it could be the one that decides everything. I picked up the phone, but didn't get a word out. On the other end, I heard a familiar voice. The voice that used to mean so much to me now sounded like a verdict. "Dennis, you can't avoid what has already begun," the voice said. It was Winston. He knew I was on the edge. He knew I had already made my choice. "I knew you'd come to this eventually. But you don't understand the game you've entered, Dennis," Winston continued, his words cold but full of confidence. "You think you can destroy everything, but if you keep going, you'll lose everything you've ever built. I'm warning you." I felt my heart tighten. He knew I was ready. He knew I wasn't afraid to lose anymore. But was I really ready for what would happen next? "You really think this will end the way you want it to?" Winston asked, his voice tinged with a hint of mockery. "You want to destroy me, but you don't see that you've already lost everything." I stood there, gripping the phone in my hand, knowing that all my actions could lead to disaster, but I was too far in to turn back. "You think you've won," I said, my voice steady. "But it's not over. Not yet." And just as I was about to respond, another call came through. The screen lit up again, and the number wasn't one I expected. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the number on screen. It was familiar, but in that moment, I didn't know what to do. I was already on the edge, and now this call could be the final move in a game where the stakes were too high. My heart was pounding in my chest as I hesitated before picking up the phone. 100 thoughts flashed through my mind, but I couldn't stop or turn back. This call was no coincidence, and I could already feel the weight of its consequences looming over me. "Dennis," came the voice on the other end. I froze. It wasn't Winston. It was someone else. A woman's voice. And there was something in it that made me wary. "It's Mabel," she said, barely audible. "I know what you're feeling, and I understand why you've decided to act. But you have no idea what you're up against if you go any further." Her words hit me like a cold shower. I felt the tension in my body increase. Mabel had always been reserved, but now her voice sounded anxious, as if she was trying to warn me about something far more dangerous than I had imagined. "What do you mean, Mabel?" I asked, but I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "You don't understand, Dennis," she continued, her voice tight, like she herself was on the edge. "This whole conflict, this whole game, it's not just about money. You're not just destroying your life. You're destroying everything you've ever cared about." I fell silent. Her words were too serious. I couldn't believe that everything I'd done could lead to such a catastrophe. But it was all heading in that direction. There was no way back. And just as I opened my mouth to respond, another sound interrupted. A knock at the door. Someone was at my house. I froze when I heard the knock at the door. My mind instantly shifted. I knew this wasn't just a casual visit. Each knock sounded like a reminder that I was on the edge. My steps became slow, almost silent, as if I was afraid to break this moment, knowing that everything I did now had consequences. I looked at the phone still lying on the table. Mabel hadn't finished her call, and despite everything she had said, I felt like I was missing something. Something didn't add up. But now I had to decide how to move forward. The knock came again, and I stood up, slowly walking toward the door. My thoughts narrowed down to a single question. Who could this be? I knew none of the people close to me would come in such a moment. And then, standing at the door, I realized that it could be anyone, but definitely not the person I was expecting. I opened the door and saw a silhouette that made my blood run cold. It was Winston. He stood in the doorway with a smirk that clearly didn't promise anything good. "You didn't think I'd come, did you?" he said, his voice low and calculating. "I knew you wouldn't be able to do this without my help." I couldn't believe my eyes. What was he doing here? How did he know I was ready to make a move? Every step I had taken had led to this moment. In that instant, I realized he was closer than I ever imagined. "You didn't come here to help, Winston," I said, not hiding my tension. "You're here to finish your game." Winston just smiled and stepped into the house. And before I could say anything, he spoke a sentence that threw me into shock. "You don't know everything, Dennis. I'm here to tell you who's really running this game." I stood still as Winston stepped into the house. His words echoed in my mind. I didn't know how to respond, because he had just opened up a completely new world to me, one I hadn't even suspected. He looked at me again with that same smirk, the one that had always followed him. Winston was confident, more than ever. He knew he had me in his grasp, that my next move would depend on his words, but I couldn't believe he was here to help. There was no hint of help in his voice, only manipulation. "You thought you were the one running the game, Dennis," he said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "But you didn't see the whole picture. You've been a pawn in someone else's game from the start." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. A pawn. In whose game had I ended up? This wasn't just a threat. It was a revelation, and it shook me to my core. "You're saying everything was predestined?" I said, not believing my own words. "So you've been controlling me this whole time?" "Why?" Winston sighed and shrugged slightly. "You allowed it, Dennis. Every step you've taken was part of a bigger plan, and now that you've come here, you're right in the middle of it." I couldn't understand what that meant. Why was I at the center of someone else's game? I knew it wasn't simple, but to think that I had been nothing more than a pawn was too much to bear. He paused, stepping closer to me, his eyes glinting with satisfaction. "You've always asked who's behind all of this. What if I told you that you already know that person?" Winston said with cold certainty. At that moment, as I tried to process his words, the door opened again. But this time, I didn't expect to see who stood in the doorway. I turned toward the door when it opened and froze. Standing in the doorway was someone I hadn't expected to see. His face was familiar, but in that moment, it felt foreign and unsettling. It was my old acquaintance, Sam. Sam was someone I used to work with. We had been friends once, but like everyone else, he disappeared from my life the moment he became part of that system that used me. I hadn't seen him in years, and now, his appearance in this moment made me feel like everything I had built was collapsing. He wasn't just a part of the game. He was its key. "Dennis," he said, his voice low but tinged with anxiety that couldn't be hidden. "You need to understand what's really happening. You don't know what you're actually dealing with." I stood there in silence, not knowing what to say. Sam had always been a clever manipulator, but the fear in his eyes, the eyes I once knew so well, now seemed foreign. It made me uneasy. "What are you doing here, Sam?" I asked, trying not to show my confusion. "You and Winston, what are you trying to hide from me?" He took a step forward, and I felt his gaze become sharp, like a knife. "You don't understand, Dennis. Everything you think you know is wrong. You've become a part of a game you don't control. And if you keep going, you'll lose everything, including your freedom." I couldn't believe my ears. All these years, I thought I was building my own path, but now I realized I had been nothing but a pawn in someone else's game. Sam had come here to finish his part of the manipulation. He was the key, and I was beginning to understand what was really behind it all. And just as I was ready to make my final move, Sam said the words that made me freeze. "You can't stop, Dennis. You're already trapped. Now it's your final choice." Sam's words hung in the air like a heavy weight. I stood in the room, trying to understand what he meant. I couldn't believe that everything I had done had led me into this trap. A trap I hadn't even realized until it was too late. "You're saying I'm trapped?" I asked, my voice cracking, but I was trying to keep it steady. "But who set these traps? Who made me play by their rules?" Sam took a step back and sighed heavily. "You let yourself get caught, Dennis. You thought all of this was just coincidence, that you controlled everything. But now you're in their hands, and they're not letting go." It sounded like a verdict. Every word Sam spoke at me like a blow. He was right. I had been too sure of myself. I thought my every move was calculated, that I was controlling the situation. But now, realizing that I had become part of the game, I didn't know how to escape. "What do I do, Sam?" I asked, barely holding back the despair. I was on the edge. Sam looked at me with exhaustion in his eyes. "You have to make one decision, Dennis. You can keep fighting to the end, but it will cost you everything. Or you can find a way out of this game, but don't expect it to be easy. I felt the fog in my mind begin to clear, replaced by something far more dangerous. The realization that I wasn't on the sidelines anymore. I was right in the middle of this chaos. But how? I couldn't stay quiet anymore. How do I get out if they're holding all the strings? Sam sighed and stood up. You'll have to find the answer within yourself, Dennis. But know this, no step back will come without consequences. I stood there, looking at him, realizing that he had said more than I was ready to understand. No decision was simple now, and I had to make a choice that would change my entire life. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.